groups across the world understand about social media. One, they were there before us. They were there before the pro-Israel activity. Secondly, they understood Israel is the strong one in the region, and social media works on visual content. And so what they decided to do is they decided to target, they were funded, they decided to target audience of people who are undecided. The undecided ones, they wanted to sort of bring them as much propaganda as possible with using the Facebook algorithm, which allows you to target. And given the fact that we've shifted from a world, even in social media, it used to be that people can read a nuance in Facebook. Now they can't even do that. What they want is visual content. That's what Instagram's all about. That's what TikTok is all about. So it's enough that you're pinpointing and you're finding through the Facebook algorithm an audience that's never heard anything about Israel. And you show them a picture of an Israeli soldier, and there's a million examples like that, putting a gun to a Palestinian baby. And your ability to now control the process of what that person thinks, not control, but even to challenge him, becomes basically almost none. It's almost impossible to do that. It's such a big world, social media, and we're such a small country. And within those rules, we're trying to play, and the game rules aren't always on our side. So who are the audiences that we'll meet generally on social media? We'll meet those that hate us, the one in red, obviously. We'll meet those who like us, that's the one in green. I hope I'm not colorblind and messing everybody up, but that's what I'm saying here. And the ones in yellow, the undecided, like every political campaign, for instance, those are the ones that interest us the most. In other words, we're trying to aim at the undecided audience, or the audience that is meeting for the first time the Israeli context. And the way we want to approach them is by introducing ourselves. That's basically the strongest asset that social media gives us. Now, don't get me wrong. We are interested in strengthening those who like us, and we are interested also in debating those who hate us, but not because we think that those who hate us we can convince. But what we're hoping is we're going to create an opposite effect. If I debate a hater, what I'm hoping is that someone who's neutral is seeing my debate with him. And that's why sometimes it makes sense to also have a discussion on social media with those who hate us. But what's the way, using the Facebook algorithm, right? And Yael is going to go into that a little deeper. What's the best way of answering tough questions on Facebook? We have a sort of a doctrine that we built. Doctrine is a big word. A slight example that we built that we think can help. But let's talk a bit about the complexity of the past few days specifically. And then if you can pass to the next one. And that is, what is the image problem that we're facing specifically in Operation Guardian of the Walls? Basically, I started with that. The world is looking at the specific conflict of the past few days. They're sort of zooming out of the entire tens of years where Israelis are being bombarded day after day, hour after hour, and looking at it from a very specific lens. They're saying, given the fact that something happened in Sheikh Jarrah, in a moment we'll talk about it, and that there was hostility in Eastern Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim HaMizrachit, or in the Temple Mount, then that is why Hamas is now retaliating. In other words, in most of the public perception on media, I'm not even talking new media and social media, the public perception is that all of what we're seeing in the past few days, all of the context gets summed up to what happened in Sheikh Jarrah. Now, it's worth noticing, in general, I don't think that the main debate that we as pro-Israel activists online should get into is the Sheikh Jarrah one, because that's exactly what our enemy wants. It wants that to be the conversation. We need to think here, because we're in days of war, and this is not a time where we have the time to think what's legitimate, what's not legitimate. We need to go into war mechanism. We need to think strategically. And the fact is, if we get into endless conversations about Sheikh Jarrah, then we're shifting the conversation to Sheikh Jarrah, which is exactly what's wanted. But I do want to give a little bit of ammunition for a broader context. I'm not a lawyer, and we in Israel, we're a pluralistic society, democratic society. In our organization, we all have different opinions. I can tell you, because we're a free country, and I'm proud of that, I'm not in love with all of the processes that we're seeing in East Jerusalem. But the fact of the matter is that the houses that we're talking to in a specific neighborhood in East Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah, there was a claim of land, and it happens all across Israel, by the way, not only in those borders. There was a claim of land of Jewish families from the 19th century. The issue went to court. It went up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court decided that those specific houses do belong to the ones who demand the houses back, to the Jewish owners. The Jewish owners did not request in the beginning the Arab Muslims sitting inside those houses to leave. What they asked is for rent. It was a real estate issue. Now, I don't want to be naive. Part of it, and we're not embarrassed to admit it, is not only real estate and economics. Part of it is a political, ideological, a national approach that many of us have, that Jerusalem is the one and only capital of the Jewish state. And we're not embarrassed to say that East Jerusalem, the areas closest to our holy sites where people have prayed for thousands of years, are ones that we desire to return to. But that's besides the fact that there was a Supreme Court decision that those houses belong to Jews. Rent was not being paid, and therefore the courts decided that the houses need to be evacuated. By the way, the same thing happens in settlements all the time. Settlements that are built in private land are demanded by the Israeli government and mostly the Israeli Supreme Court to move from where they are. That happened last year twice, in an area called Givata Ulpina and in an area called Sde Boaz. Twice did it happen. But here in this situation, suddenly everything has to do with Sheikh Jarrah. Of course, that's not the fact. And in the end, when we finish our session, which will end soon, I'm going to give a 5 minutes explanation that I think is a pro-Israel approach that can complex much of the anti-Israel sentiment that we see out there. So let's go to the next slide. And let's talk, and another one, please. And let's look at basically at the solutions. Okay, you're now in a Facebook group. You're on your own social media, you're on a college campus, and you see someone saying something that is not legitimate criticism at Israel that everybody has, but a real anti-Israel, delegitimizing, double standard, sometimes anti-Semitic approach to the realities that are happening. For instance, saying Israel is a murderous regime. Israel is doing ethnic cleansing, like the Palestinian ambassador said a few hours ago on the stage of the UN. In other words, if you're seeing that, what is the way to approach? And in general, how do we approach a question in social media? And again, this is the major medium where we find ourselves, one back please, where we find ourselves dealing with. So we built for you a 4-step plan, and we'll send it to you afterwards, of how you answer complex questions in social media. The first approach that we need to remember, many times we want to go straight to the facts, but no, the first thing we want to have is the personal component. We want to give our own story. We want to use the universal language. That's mostly for the Israelis. We start talking about conversations that we in Israel understand the nuances, but other people don't, and sometimes they can understand this in a wrong way. Don't be a propaganda tool. You don't have to represent the Jewish agency or Israel's foreign ministry. Be Neil, be Amy, be Rachel, be your own selves. You're on social media. It's you that's what's interesting. It's through you that people will connect also to the idea that you're trying to convey. Use an authentic language, and of course, use a respectful dialogue. Sometimes when someone swears at you and you answer respectfully, it's not an educational concept that I'm giving. I'm not an educator. It's also, I believe in it on an ethical level, but it's also a tactical way to have those people who are undecided say, look, that's the true face of the opposers of Israel, and here's the true face of those who love Israel. So the first component when I start a Facebook answer is the personal component, a story. We were just talking in a session with someone, show a picture from a bomb shelter. If you're living in America, show a picture of other people from bomb shelters. Yael will touch that also in her session right away. The next component is basically is the complex component. And what do I mean by that? You started by your personal story, but then put in one small nuance, all right? He followed the flow. He's following the flow now. He's learning to know who you are. And now you can put in a complex nuance. That could be, there is no battle between Israelis and the citizens of Gaza. The fact of the matter is that in the 1980s, women and men from Sderot, from Be'er Sheva and other places did shopping in Gaza. The fact is, and that can lead you to tell him, did you know that the Hamas took over in 2005 the Gaza Strip? Then it was actually elected, and that we don't have a war with the civilians there. That Hamas is creating a double war crime. One, it's firing against citizens, and secondly, it's hiding against civilians. That's the core of the conflict here. That's what makes it so complex. which is anyhow a good terminology in pro-Israel activity, because we're trying to take them from the realm of hate to the realm of complication, of maybe the next time they see a CNN video saying to themselves, okay, I'm not an Israel supporter, I'm not going to dance Am Yisrael Chai in the Kotel now, but maybe this issue is a little more complicated, because I also remember the personal story and the complex nuance that was given to me during the answer. Let's go to the next one, and we're ending in a moment. The other one is the intellectual approach. I have to admit, unfortunately, I'm someone who studied philosophy, so you realize that I'm not really in love with the fact that this is the least important one in social media. But the honest truth is, and this has also been researched, this is probably not the strongest way to create an impact in social media. It's a bonus, and it can only happen after people are connected to you. Once they're connected to you, then you can give an idea. And the idea is very simple. The fact of the matter is, and this is the intellectual appeal that I want to leave us here with this evening so that we can have some of the ammunition. The fact of the matter is, even if we have a sort of a disagreement about what happened, on the broadest level, Israel is not occupying in the Gaza Strip. It's not a political opinion what I'm telling you now. It's a categorical fact. Israel is not occupying. We evacuated the last settler in 2005. Since 2005 and before 2005, long before Sheikh Jarrah, to all those who are interested, long before that, missiles were being fired and our civilians were terrorized, both in Gush Katif, the settlements that were evacuated, and of course in Beersheba, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and now in Tel Aviv. We don't control Gaza. Gaza has another border with Egypt. The only reason we have a blockade is because there was weapon smuggling into the Gaza Strip that has only one attempt and one attempt only, and that's to terrorize our citizens. And the fact of the matter is that Israel, and this is, I know it sounds like a cliche, but we can emphasize this, and there's no one better than General Richard Kemp, who will be in a moment speaking to us to emphasize this. The fact of the matter is we take every precaution, and I have a personal story of the precautions that my unit took to not hurt civilians on the other side, which resulted in the price and death of 7 of my friends in one night in 2014, to not hit civilians on the other side. The Hamas, also a categorical fact, is not even hiding the fact that they're attempting to fire only on citizens. And they're hiding their missiles. And we can show hundreds of videos, and if you go into our Google Drive, you'll find them, of where those missiles are located, creating a double crime, terrorizing our citizens, and also bringing to the death of their citizens when we, as every democratic country, need to retaliate. So if I need to summarize, in the end of the day, we need to remember, I started from the micro, from saying, and sorry, the last nuance, which is very important also, when you end the social media answer, always be active. Invite them to come to some internet site. Invite them to come to a tour if you're living in Israel, or if you're touring Israel. Make it sort of a friendly engagement, not someone who's saying you're a murderous country and you begin by saying, well, first of all, I respect your opinion. We're not talking about that, of course. We're talking about a nuanced conversation, or those neutral people that I'm meeting. Invite them, have a call for action so that this conversation can continue and that you can become ambassadors for Israel. In the end of the day, and with this I'll end, every Israeli knows the notion of being called up for reserve. And we need our brothers and sisters, many of them joining us here tonight, and I say this honestly, to have their reserve, to be called up to the flag as well, and understand that there's another battle and arena, the battle of the public perception. It's not only about the truth, this battle. In the end of the day, what starts from the public goes up also to the political. And part of the reason that we're seeing some of the left-wing blank within the Democratic Party, I saw Senator Sanders, without getting into the politics, suggesting to have a decision in Congress condemning Israel. When we see that, in the end of the day, it starts from the roots, from the people, from the social media. And that's why we need you on this front. Because if we don't have, part of a legitimacy to act is also an international legitimacy. And this is our front, and this is our task. And it's something that we need to take deeply seriously, act with, and remember that in the end of the day, it's about the people. The personal connection will create the broader effect towards Israel's public perception. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Matan. I'm very excited to introduce you our next speaker. Colonel Richard Kemp is a former British Army commander who has served for almost 30 years. participated in multiple operations. Among them, he was the commander of the British forces in Afghanistan. He is a writer and an expert on the Middle East, counterterrorism, and in particular in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He's a frequent speaker and a true advocate for Israel. And I'm honored to introduce you, Richard. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Yael, and thank you for your kind words, and thank you also, Matan, for your excellent presentation and also for your very kind words. I appreciate them. I'm going to speak fairly briefly this evening. The thing that I think gives me an advantage over you, and I'm sure there are many things that give you advantages over me, but the one thing I think in this field that gives me an advantage is the fact that I'm not Jewish. I'm not Israeli, and I served in the British Armed Forces for 30 years, fighting the same kind of conflict alongside various allies, including Americans, French, Germans, and many other European allies and allies from around the world. And what that does, it allows me to be perceived as probably more objective than you are, and also not only expert after a long military career, but also expert in terms of being able to compare IDF actions to other military actions by other armed forces. And that's one of the disadvantages I think that Israel often has, is that its forces always fight alone by design, by Israel's design, always fight alone, and therefore are seen in isolation. And so actions that the IDF might do, they're the same actions as the British Army would do, the American Army, but no one ever thinks of that. They don't compare them. And they can't, they therefore think that when what they consider are bad things happen, that's uniquely Israeli. But actually, the same what they would consider as bad things also happen among British, American, French, all of the other armed forces of the Western countries, because we all fight using the same doctrines, the same tactics, etc. So I think, and again, I know there's a huge amount that you need to study in just to keep abreast of this, and I'll mention it in a second. But one thing I would urge you to do, if you have the time and the interest, is perhaps to look at what other armies have been doing in similar situations, because there are lessons to be drawn by comparisons to inform yourselves and the people you're discussing this with. It is a tough fight. There's no doubt it's a very tough fight. The reason it's a tough fight is because we are fighting probably the greatest slur campaign in the history of the world, which began decades ago, has been funded to a vast extent, including by Arab countries, by Russia, by China, and other countries around the world, and individuals and foundations who want to use this propaganda campaign to bring Israel down. And part of the reason, particularly when you're looking at countries like Russia and China, part of the reason for that is because an indirect way of hitting the United States of America. And that's another reason why Israel often gets vilified, because they are a proxy, they're seen as a proxy by many people for the US. And while they wouldn't dare say anything really in some cases against the US, certainly not dare to attack them, they will Israel, and they'll see themselves as hitting the US by doing that. So it is a very tough fight, but Israel has an extraordinary story to tell in this fight. And the latest operation, Guardian of the Walls, that's going on now, I think will probably prove to be the most sophisticated military operation in history, in terms of both the amount of damage it's done to the enemy that Israel's fighting, and also in terms of the relative lack of civilian casualties that have been caused. And if you compare the death toll between fighters and civilians in this Gaza conflict, this current conflict, and previous conflicts, to other conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, I think you'll find that Israel's death rate of civilians is favorable. In other words, comparatively fewer proportion of civilians have been killed by Israeli action. And I was part of a delegation of of generals from around the world who came to visit Israel and investigate the operation in 2014. These were from America, Britain, France, Germany, Australia, India, numerous other countries. And those generals, at the end of their investigation of Israel's operations, concluded that one of their greatest worries was that their own armed forces, American forces, British, etc., would not be able to achieve the same standards as Israel had achieved in protecting the lives of innocent civilians. Now, it's an extraordinary thing for these people. They're all chiefs of staff, heads of their own armed forces. And that's an extraordinary thing for people to say when you don't know about the IDF and when you see what the world says about the IDF, because it's the diametric opposite. But it is a fact, it is true. It's not just me saying it. So you have a great story to tell, as long as people are prepared to listen, as long as you're persuasive in telling it. I think in the current situation, Matan mentioned the idea of being basic and being pretty straightforward and direct in these arguments rather than trying too much sophistication. And I think one thing that we should all know is that the strategy of Hamas is not to kill Israelis. It's not to kill. It's not to take over Israel. It's not to defeat the IDF, because they can't. They know they can't. Yes, they can kill a few Israelis, not too many. Tragically, any is of course too many, but not very many comparatively. They can't have an impact militarily. They simply can't. What they do is they try and lure Israel in every of these campaigns to counterattack. Israel has no choice. They fight back. Innocent civilians, unfortunately, die. And that's what Hamas want. Hamas want, above all, for their own civilian population to die. They are the first army, if you call them an army, in history that has ever used the death of their own civilian population as weapons of war. And that's something people need to understand. And that's what they want. They want them dead, because then they can use those deaths, as they have done very many times, very effectively, to condemn Israel, to vilify Israel, to isolate Israel in the United Nations Human Rights Council, in the United Nations Security Council, in the International Criminal Court, and in numerous other governments, human rights groups, etc. That is their objective. That's their strategy. It's the only way they can get at Israel, and they're very successful at doing so. We've only got to see recently Israeli individuals, the attempts to investigate them and drag them into the dock in The Hague in the International Criminal Court. The second thing I think is that people do have to understand is that the Palestinian leadership do not want a two-state solution. This is the great cry of the West, of the US, of the UK, of other countries, EU. We want a two-state solution. Well, actually, it doesn't matter a damn what the UK, US, EU wants. It's what Israel wants. And also it's what the Palestinians want. And the reality is the Palestinian leadership now don't want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution. They want one state, and that's an Arab state with the Jewish state annihilated. That is their goal and objective. It's stated in their charters. Hamas have one way to achieve it. Palestinian Authority have a different way to achieve it. But it is fact. And all you have to do is look at the record of rejection of any second statehood that's been offered to them since even going back to the 1930s. It was first offered to them, and every time rejected because they're not willing to accept a Jewish state alongside them. I think, one other, I'm not going to speak much longer, but one other thing I'd mention is I think the key issue here, I mean, the people who have suffered in this campaign above all, and the people who I feel have most sympathy for and the strongest support for, personally, are Palestinian civilians in Gaza. They're the ones that have suffered above all and will continue to suffer. Now, I'm not belittling the suffering of Israelis, those who have been rushing to their air raid shelters several times a day for a long, long time. And those who have been killed, who have been seriously wounded or had their houses destroyed by rockets. I don't belittle that, but it's nothing compared to what's happened to civilians in Gaza. Now, why? It's not Israel that's caused that. It's Hamas aggression, unprovoked aggression, nothing to do with any house evictions, but all to do with a power struggle within the Palestinian leadership and the desire to isolate Israel. That's why it's happened. And therefore, Hamas are responsible for the death and the suffering of Palestinian civilians. Every single one of them even those which have been killed, let's say, by a stray missile from Israel, or by unavoidable collateral damage, every one of those is the fault of Hamas, and they are responsible for their suffering. And they will continue to be responsible for their suffering while they continue to oppose and fight Israel. And that's, I think, the point that people ought to keep in mind, because we shouldn't belittle that. We shouldn't kind of reject that as being, that's an incidental matter, which, it's a tough fight, and Israel, has to inflict these casualties. They do have to inflict casualties, not because they want to, but because no choice, despite all the measures they take. But they are suffering. Stopping their suffering is the most urgent thing about this. And that doesn't necessarily mean ending the war early. It means doing the maximum possible damage to Hamas. And I'm glad to say that Israel seems to be doing that at the moment. I think just finally, really understand the facts. It's a very tough thing to understand because it's complex, it's changing. There's historical issues involved in it. There's multiple different narratives that people are pushing out. And you, all of you, I'm sure, are not professional, doing this professionally, as I am not. But it does take a lot of time, but you do have to do it. You've got to do the homework, because otherwise you can't get into an argument with some of these jokers who are on the other side, because they don't have the facts. Some do, but what they do have is throwaway lines which they'll use to make you look stupid if you can't contradict it. So you've got to really at least get I know everyone here, I'm sure you all have some understanding, you've got to increase that. Secondly, I think focus, as Matan said, focus on the ones who are not committed. Don't focus on the ones who are hardcore anti. Yes, you need to do something with them. Focus on the uncommitted ones. I actually had a conversation in a university in Britain after a talk I gave, and some of the people who've been protesting, I always manage to get a nice protest at university. I wouldn't go to a university that isn't going to protest me. After one of these talks, I spoke to the protesters at the University of Bristol, and they were in a pub. I saw them in a pub afterwards. I had a couple of drinks in there, and they were in the same place by chance. And they had their placards under the table. Kemp's a war criminal, or whatever the latest thing was, or Israel apartheid, something like that. And I got talking to them. These were hardcore people. They were active protesters, but we spoke. We had a couple of beers together. I won't say they changed their mind, but they did admit to me that they had been told things by me in that pub that they didn't know anything about. They'd never heard of that side of the argument, because most of them have only heard one side. So you can get at the hardcore ones as well in the right circumstances. Mainly focus on the soft. Also, Matan mentioned strengthening our supporters. That's very, very important. I think it's almost as important as the hardcore elements, who you probably won't be able to change, but strengthening the supporters, because it's so easy, if you support Israel, to get disillusioned by all the negative stuff that's going on. And the worst thing we can have is Jewish people. I know there are plenty already, but any more Jewish people who are opposed to Israel and condemn Israel, because that is the worst enemy of Israel, I think. So strengthen preach to the choir, as people say. And finally, social media is very important, as you know, and this is what this is all about, and it reaches a lot of people. But I can tell you for sure, and not just from my experience in this area, but in many areas, there is nothing that is stronger than personal contact. Social media isn't. I mean, yeah, you can hit a lot of people in social media. You can never hit too personally, but you can influence individuals a lot more directly than you can on social media. And I would urge you, when you get the opportunity to do that, to use a direct personal approach, because you'll find you will definitely influence people a lot more effectively in that way. I know social media is, cool and trendy or whatever. I'm a very, very old fat man, so I don't know what the current terminology is, but I know social media is the kind of answer to every question, but actually it's not. It's very useful, but it's not the only thing. But thank you very much, Yael.
Thank you so much, Colin, for your words and for speaking up for our truth. For me, at least, it gives more motivation to keep fighting this very, very complex fight. both in the front and the digital front line. And I have to say, regarding to what you just said, the media for us is a tool which is relevant at the moment. Us in Israelis, and that's why we're called Israelis, we know that this is the personal, one-by-one interaction. That's what we're based on. And so when there is no war that we have to post on Facebook and support the supporters, as you called it, that's what we are all about. So thank you so much again. It was a real pleasure, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I've got to go now because I have another engagement, but good luck to you all, and you're fighting a really good fight. And what I would urge you to do is just to keep attacking in that fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'll just let everyone know we were supposed to finish in 7 more minutes. If I may, I'm asking you to stay 10 more minutes in addition because we're a bit behind. If anyone needs to leave, then that's okay. What we're going to do right now, I'm going to share my screen. We're actually going to go into the media to talk about everything we spoke about, but how we actually do it, how we take the personal story and put it in the media, how we show who we are and our routine and our day in the very most simple way, authentic way of interaction through the media. So the practices of how to do it, how to take the attitude that Matan spoke about, and to create content that the whole idea is to show the Israeli personal angle can be done in a few different ways. But first I'll say, do you all see my screen? I see, wait, is it cut? Matan, I see you, so if you see it, just give me a nod.
Yes, I see it.
Perfect. So I'll just say that we don't, as Matan said, it's not a tool for propaganda. We're talking about telling our story on the very, very basis of being personal and interacting on a very human level component. We don't want to tell the story as if we're talking on a spreadsheet with the notes and facts and throw facts at people, but we want to take it personal. That's what we're aiming for. So how do we do it? How do we become those influencers? Even though we have 200 or 300 Facebook friends, we can be those influencers by sharing the personal story. It can be other people's story. It can be my own personal story, added with the right explanation and added with the right facts that we learned and we educate ourselves on, in addition to this perspective of personal view. Now I'll go deep a little bit. I'll just let you know that the video I'm gonna play has a siren in it, so don't freak out, it's the video. So this is actually the core of this whole issue, of everything we talk about is the visual. That's the core of it. This is a very simple visual of a person running downstairs, not edited. The camera is shaking, but that can serve us at times even better than the facts themselves, because visual components just like those, what you can see here, the picture in the middle is newborn babies in a hospital during a siren. The parents, the dads had to take them out of their room to the hallway to be protected. And the girl with her dog that was so frightened, he didn't want to get into the shelter. Those type of pictures and footages are the ones that are the most powerful because they show exactly what we're going through. They're not just talking, somewhere above us and about facts that we're not sure about, or the history, that someone sees the history differently. That's what it is. That's our daily life, and it passes and it brings up emotion. When someone sees something like this, it brings up emotions and the ability to emphasize with it. And that's what we want to do, especially to show it that this, remember the majority of people that are ignorant, that they not either, anti-Israel or not loving us already. That's the type of people we want to show it to. So it can be other people's stories. Since some of you, or maybe the majority of your audience from abroad, you will get from us the drive and the links to all the necessary tools and the content, the personal content for you to share, to actually use. If you tell about your friend from Israel or your cousin from Israel or someone who's going through something and you share it in a storytelling way, that's what it's all about. And the picture on the left, it's hard to see, but the note, My friend sent it to me. It's from Zikim Kibbutz down south, right next to Gaza. And it says, be aware when you walk by because it's a sniper's area and they can aim and shoot, which is unbelievable. You know, you can ask people, you can put it on Facebook on a post and say, imagine you walk outside of your neighborhood and you see a sign saying, be aware, don't go from this specific route because it's a sniper area. That's the type of things we want the world to show because it's not shown enough. My own story, that I put a few examples of people who posted their own stories. That's a Brit Milah inside a shelter, Shabbat dinner with soldiers from across the border, and a woman who's breastfeeding her child inside a shelter in the middle of the night under the siren. It can be the most simple things, guys. It doesn't have to be. It can be a picture of an empty beach or a picture of your empty street, because that's how Israel looks like in the past week. Your own experience or your friend's experience, that's the dealing with situation, that's what we want to bring up. A few things we should keep in mind when we talk about the media and Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. We should use the right platform. Where do we act? How do we act? So if we're referring to comments, to putting comments, then you should do it wherever there is the more traffic. You know, when there is always the longest line in the supermarket, the one that you don't want to get into, on Facebook, that's the one you get into. The most busiest one, that's where you'd want to post your comment. Why? Because that's where it will get the most exposure. If it's an anti-Israel one, you can post your comment and a lot of your friends can see it. And when your friends see it, their friends see that they commented and so on. That's the type of influence we're talking about. When people like football players like, I don't know, I don't have my names, or The Weeknd or Trevor Noah or Gigi Hadid put things on Facebook and get a lot of responses, that's where you want to be at. That's where you want to make a comment. In addition to that, if you see a friend, if it jumps on your Facebook that a friend made a comment on another post, it means that's the type of post you want to comment as well. Same thing with your traffic. The more traffic, the more exposure you get. Use hashtags, not even just Israel under fire, Israel under attack, or free Gaza from Hamas, not even those. You can even put the hashtag free Palestine. If you don't want to be preaching to the choir, you put this type of hashtag and it gets to the other side as well. And that might be an audience you want to reach out also. It might surprise you, but that's okay. Another thing to say, every social network has its own characteristic. In Facebook, obviously, there is some room for a dialogue. You can start from a picture, you can start from something personal, and then take it on a more deeper level. But obviously on Instagram, what works best is a very powerful picture. On TikTok, something with music. At Twitter, it should be very short because people won't stay and read everything you put on it. This is another thing to keep in mind. Regarding hate speech, incitement, or racism posts, you report them. And first of all, if they're small pages with not a lot of followers, you don't comment, you don't make a comment, because if you do, that gives the exposure to the post you don't want to expose. As mentioned before, if there is not a lot of traffic, if there is not a long line, then you don't go in it. But if it has some of pieces of hate speech or incitement or racism or anti-Semitism, then you report either to Facebook or to Instagram. And if a lot of people report, then the profile can be removed. Use non-copyrighted content, something to keep in mind. A lot of the pictures are protected and you don't want to get yourself into a situation. We will send you at the end of the meeting links to our drives and all the necessary files you can use that are personal content that either we made or people we know made, and it's free of, it's non-copyrighted content. Ask permission. It's less relevant for you guys, it's more for Israelis who are here. If you run to shelter and you take a video and other people are on it, make sure you let them know they are on it and that you are going to use it. And you know, not less important than everything I just mentioned, the technical stuff. Keep in mind that we want a respectful dialogue. We just said at our own mission that everything is based on people-to-people attitude. If we could, we would speak with those people. We always say, imagine you hold a bottle of beer in your hand and you have a conversation. That's the type of conversation we'd want you to imagine you're having. And so do not underestimate the other side or not acknowledge it. What is Palestine? It's like they say to us, what is Israel? We don't want to curse them. We don't want to take the dialogue to a lower level, but the contrary. We want to go deeper. We don't need to manage all the time accusing other people and anti-Semitic and hating Israel, but the opposite, show where we're strength. So show our strength and where our human component is evident. You can talk about the leaflets that we put on rooftops before we bomb it, or the fact that Kippat Barzel, which I forget in English right now at the moment, is a technology that's based to defend and not to attack. And that's something that we should aim to manage, to mention all the time in all those posts and all the social media as much as we can. Pictures of damage, either for people or to property. It's not enough to just show this, I show the wall on the right. Don't just show the wall and say a rocket hit. That's the wall of my bedroom. That's where I study during the day. That's my table is right there behind the other side of the wall. That's the necessary thing, to show the human, the people side in it. And at the end of the day, and something we should remember, even when we're provoked, and we'll be provoked all the time on social media, we are the face of Israel. You are and we are the face of Israel, and that's what we should keep in mind all the time. Just to sum it up, to let you guys know, that is what we're here for, to use who we are and what we are, what we brought from home, and how we experience things on a very personal, basic level, very authentic. We don't need to think to be more smart than that. And only through those things, through Israelis and people who support Israelis, can we show the real Israel. And now we've been talking with you all this time, and we want to say, like, let's get to the tachlis, let's get to business. We say tachlis in Hebrew. So now what? Call a friend from abroad, call someone you know and you think you can have a dialogue with, or show him a picture that is on our drive or someone from Israel sent it to you. Share a post, report a negative post. Join our WhatsApp group where we'll be sending you those type of posts to report or to share or to like. Remember to put hashtag, and we'll be sending a survey. I'd really appreciate it if everyone can answer the survey. We're trying to get better from one workshop to another. It's been a crazy week, and every night we have a different workshop, trying to get better from one night to another. So if you feel you take 1 minute to fill it in, that would be really great. Again, we'll be sending you an email with all the necessary links and the material that you need, including the drive with all the content itself. And we do have a couple more minutes if you have questions. But thank you everyone for joining. And thank you Israelis, Eden, Ronnie, Yakir, Eyal, Matan, of course, for being here and helping us promote Israel and showing it's for what it is actually.
Yeah, there are several questions on the chat if you want to answer. From Naomi.
Yes, I'm reading it right now. I see a lot of thank yous. Okay. I'm not familiar with the use of hashtag. If I make my own soft Hamas welcomes that. Okay, so hashtags, that's a good point, which I forgot to mention. Hashtag actually is a symbol for a big group. Let's say there is a hashtag, that's the most known one, unfortunately more known than Israel is under fire. There is the Free Palestine. It means that if you post something and your idea is Free Palestine, then a lot of people will put it. Now, in this digital frontlines battle, we're a bit behind. There are many more hashtags on the pro-Palestinian sides and not the pro-Israel one. You'd wanna use a hashtag that already exists. I can give it to you guys right now. It is Israel under fire, Israel under attack. And something that I think is significant is save Gaza from Hamas. Because people say save Palestinians from Israel. We actually say the problem is Hamas, who is in charge on Gaza. So I would say use hashtags that exist so you get the more exposure, because it's a bigger group of people who are already using those hashtags. Matan, if you want to add, then of course.
No, you answered it perfectly.
Any more questions? Let's see. Could it be dangerous? That's a good question about responding to one of the anti-Zionist posts. Like, is there any way for them to find private information about you through Facebook? I hope not. I hope they're not doing, cybersecurity, every one of those. But if you're making a comment, let's say on a very viral post that has thousands of comments, which I've done before, then what you'd get, what I got, is friends requests and comments from a lot of Israel haters. And that's something I kept in mind and I knew I was gonna get. Regarding if they get a personal information, that's more of a cyber, if they have the cyber ability, then yes. But if we're talking about the very viral stuff, then I would feel okay to make a comment and be one of many.
I see Helen asked, why doesn't Israel have better PR? I mean, it will take the whole night to get into some of the criticism that we have as Israelis have about our own government, which is, it's of course good, also good for society to have that. But the honest truth is that it touches the elements that I talked about in my session, which is we're standing against very hard odds. In a world that doesn't want nuance and wants visual content, it's very easy for people to feel compassionate to what's perceived as the underdog. And that's why we brought in sort of this new approach of the people-to-people connection. In other words, trying to establish, in general, the general spoke about it as well, trying to establish a real personal connection, whether on social media or out there, so that it's not only a PR mechanism, it's not only, sort of general terminologies that sound as if we're speaking from the Jewish agency. It's matan, speaking to someone from the world. He gets to know me, and through my eyes, he gets to see Israel. And that's sort of, we're trying to bypass the PR challenge. Of course, there's also bureaucratic funding and other issues that are a part of it. But the general problem is that we face very tough odds in a world that doesn't want nuance and that sympathizes with what's perceived as the victim without asking many questions. I think we could summarize, Yael. A lot had questions regarding if we can send in the material, etc. So I trust that you can respond to that.
Yes, we'll be sending everything to whoever signed up through the form, to registration form. You'll get an email of the survey, which we'd appreciate if you'd fill in, including the links to all the content that we mentioned and the websites and everything. And let me see if I missed, there was one more thing I wanted. No, we covered it all. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. If it's night or noon, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was excellent.
Thank you, Lital.
sentido bien, Luis. He tenido un par de semanas muy malas. No he podido. Hola, Isaquito, ¿cómo estás? Qué bueno, qué gusto verte. Te presento a Luis Loaiza, mi amigo. Luis, te presento a Isaac, amigo
Darío,
mío.
qué gusto saludarte.
Amigo mío de toda la vida, aunque no lo creas, le cambiaba los pañales cuando era niño este chavo. A ti, Isaquito, a ti. Nos conocemos de toda la vida, somos amigos de toda la vida. Él tiene un diario muy importante que es Diario Judío y queremos poner una promoción ahí y bueno, es importante que estés en esta junta. Y bueno, te contesto, Luis, pasé 2 semanas muy malas, muy malas, terriblemente mal, donde no estuve concentrado para poder estar un tiempo en la compu. Ahorita me siento bastante mejor de lo que me sentí, hoy estoy bastante bien, pero me la he pasado muy mal, Luis, muy mal. Duermo un promedio de 3, 4 horas el día y los dolores que tengo son muy fuertes. Entonces me cuesta mucho trabajo estar bien y los momentos que tengo, pues los aprovecho para chambear. Por eso no te pude hablar. Te pido un...
No te preocupes, no pasa nada.
Yo sé que Leo ha estado en contacto contigo. Te pido un millón de disculpas si tenemos pendiente tuyo continuar con lo que tenemos. Ya luego te hablo para ponernos de acuerdo.
Cuenta con ello.
Gracias. Leo, te presento a Isaac de Diario Judío. Isaac, Leo es nuestro director comercial. Luis es un experto en marketing, en redes sociales y nos está apoyando con todo lo que estamos haciendo. Y falta que entre Gustavo. Déjame mandarle un mensaje, pero por favor, Leo, preséntate con Isaac.
Isaac, ¿cómo estás? Muy buenas tardes. Qué gusto, qué gusto.
Bueno, pues ahí estamos. Mira, ahí está Eud. Eud, ¿cómo estás? Bienvenido.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Isaac, y Eud es la persona que nos hizo la página, los fondos de pantalla, el marketing digital, todo. Y lo invité porque quería que estuviera presente. Y bueno, adelante, mi querido Isaac. La verdad es que ha hecho una labor EUD impresionantemente buena. Queremos poner un anuncio contigo, queremos que nos platiques y EUD te va a hacer algunas preguntas con relación al target. Y bueno, la idea es ahorita que nos pongas en contexto de lo que tienes, qué podemos hacer. Y por eso están Luis, Leo y EUD. Ahorita entra Gustavo también. Pero adelante, por favor. Mira, ahí está Gus. Gus, ¿cómo estás? Espérame, te voy a dejar compartir la pantalla. Hola, Gus. No me oye. Bueno. Adelante, mi querido Isaac, todo tuyo. Sí.
Una pregunta ahí, Isaac. Hablando de los miembros de la comunidad, el mercado ademas, lo entiendo bien. ¿Cuántos son? ¿No? ¿Cuántos lo integran? ¿Tienes el dato? Híjole, puede ser. No, la verdad, no, por eso la pregunta es para ti, pero podría pensar, no sé, 200,000 personas.
¿Y tú?
Fíjate, ese es muy buen dato, ¿no? Sí.
Leo, para que tengas una idea, habemos 45,000 personas en la comunidad judía en toda la República Mexicana, incluyendo Guadalajara, Monterrey, Cancún y México.
Ok.
Todo el mundo, tú te fuiste bajo, hay quien piensa que somos 2 millones.
Ok. Quiere decir que hace mucho ruido. Es muy bueno, ¿no? Sí. Sí. Ok, gracias. Perfecto. Perfecto. Ok. Pregunta, ¿puede ser videos también? Ok. Gracias.
Oye, Isaac, me llama la atención algo. En tu página de Facebook, ¿por qué no tienes interacciones? O sea, bueno, primero preguntarte, ¿esta es tu página de Facebook? Es que veo es que veo tus publicaciones y algunas, la mayoría no tiene ni un like, ni un compartir, ni comentario. ¿Hay algo que estés ahorita baneado o algo? Ok.
Estamos viendo tu pantalla, pero de tu Radicom.
Sí, estoy viendo Creator Studio. Sí, bien, bien, gracias.
Android. Ok. Gracias, Isaac. Yo tengo un par de dudas. La primera es... ¿sí? Muy bien, ok. Mira, la primera es la parte de las estadísticas. Tú nos otorgas estadísticas de cuántos clics le dieron a nuestros banners semanalmente, quincenal, mensual. Ok, y ahora, cada clic que le dieron, tú puedes saber, hablando de microsegmentación, es decir, nos dices, pues principalmente entran entre 16 y 24 años, o 25 y 35 años. A mí me interesa... No, no, pero tampoco con un... Ok, ¿por qué te lo pregunto? Para nosotros es muy importante, si tú me dices, tengo 200,000, 300,000 visitas, o sea, está genial, es un público bueno, una cantidad, pero eso para segmentarlo y decirle, a Radicom le interesa trabajar con ciertas industrias, o sea, esos 200,000 no son las industrias que buscamos, necesitamos ser pero muy efectivos en enfocarnos en su mercado. Entonces, sí es para nosotros importante que tú nos des esa data de que me digas, oye, entraron personas entre 35 años y 40 y son del área o de la industria tal. Si no es así, la verdad es que nos costaría trabajo para nosotros saber el resultado real. Claro, sí. De hecho, mira, justo te lo pregunto porque sí hemos trabajado con plataformas donde te tienes que registrar y dar tus datos. Es decir, a una revista electrónica te registras, das tu edad, etcétera, y con eso se pueden hacer microsegmentaciones. Y cuando ofertas tus banners, tú le dices a tu público, oye, a tu cliente, exacto, o sea, mira, yo te voy a conseguir gente que le dé clic, que están en la industria X o de ciertas edades. De esa manera se puede lograr. Pero entonces tú no nos darías esa data exacta y ese mercado que nosotros buscamos, sino más bien es al aire decir, pues mira, yo sé que mi mercado, al ser judíos, tienen este, pero no soy exacto. O sea, nada más estoy... Exacto, claro. Sí, mira, te lo... Sí,
Isaac,
claro.
Isaac, enséñales el diario, por favor. Compártenos para que vean el diario.
Sí, mira, mientras nos enseñas el diario, Isaac, te pregunto todo esto porque nuestro interés es que seamos más efectivos en las estrategias o campañas publicitarias. Entonces, para nosotros es importante basarnos en datos. Y si nosotros nos basamos nuestras campañas en datos, es prácticamente un albur. O sea, decir, yo voy a lanzar una campaña con un mercado que no sé cuál es y tal vez son niños de 10 años que están entrando, de 15, que no son los tomadores de decisiones o no están en las industrias que nosotros estamos buscando y realmente ahí la inversión para nosotros será un gasto. O sea, realmente no tendrá una efectividad o seríamos directos en la campaña y obviamente de este lado nuestras campañas no van a ser efectivas porque nuestro medio no nos está dando pues esta pauta, esta microsegmentación. Claro. Y una duda, si yo te pregunto, si yo vendo playeras de fútbol y quiero entrar en tu diario de comunidad judía, ¿tú qué me responderías? Sí, sí, claro. Claro. Ok, muy bien. Ahora, otra duda. El tema, digamos que de inversión, ¿tú manejas el tema de costo por clic o pago por clic o es un feed mensual? Ok, ¿y cuál es tu medio, hablando de estadísticas, de que las personas le den clic a tu banner? Yo entiendo que tiene que ser un banner atractivo, tu producto también influye o servicio, o sea, toda la parte de diseño, ¿no? Pero realmente vámonos a un intermedio, entre el peor banner que has visto y el peor producto, hasta el mejor producto y el mejor banner, ¿cuál es tu media? Ok, ok, pero ellos buscaban presentación, claro. Ellos buscaban nada más visibilidad, ¿no? Claro, ok, ok. Y una última pregunta, ¿ya has tenido clientes como Radicom? Es decir, que vendan soluciones como nosotros. Ok, muy bien, Isaac. Sí, pues yo de este lado nada más esas preguntas tengo para, digo, poder pues llevar toda esta parte digital. A nosotros nos interesa mucho trabajar con datos y tomar decisiones en base a datos, ¿no? Sí, sí entiendo muy bien. Claro, claro. Ok, muy bien, Isaac. Sí, pues me parece muy interesante. Sí, muy bien. Muy bien, Isaac. No, pues de este lado no me quedan dudas. La verdad es que está interesante lo que haces y sí es muy, muy atractivo los sitios web que manejas. Sí. Sí, claro. Ok. Sí, claro. Ok, muy bien. Sí. No sé, Leo, tú, si tienes algún comentario, Luis.
Sí, yo entiendo muy bien lo que dice Isaac, de que sí, igual no vamos a tener la microsegmentación que hoy en algunas páginas se pretende. Creo que sí es el público o la audiencia a la que podemos llegar. Lo único que tendremos que evaluar, Eud y Luis y yo, es que buscamos, justo Isaac, es lo que tú dijiste, una palabra muy importante, que nosotros buscamos el call to action de inmediato. Por eso la inquietud de Eud y por eso lo que te preguntó Luis. Nosotros desde nuestros anuncios de Facebook, en la parrilla que hacemos y en el copy que hacemos, buscamos que desde ahí la gente haga un call to action, ni siquiera mandarlos a una página de internet para que la página de internet porque entre más pasos tenga que hacer el cliente, menos efectivo. Entonces, nosotros buscamos que desde que hagamos un anuncio, en ese momento nos puedan dejar sus datos para nosotros inclusive, de nosotros estar justo, de hecho, hoy Charlie me mandó 4 leads que llegaron en la mañana, en la madrugada, ¿no? Me dice, Leo, atiéndelos, hay estos 4 leads. Y viene el correo y viene el teléfono y nosotros ya como la parte comercial tendremos que hacer contacto, generar una entrevista y entender las necesidades del cliente. Entonces, creo que aquí nada más tendrán... Sí, 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 sí.
Isaac,
Sí, sí, sí. Sí, sí, sí. Sí, para una mejor comunicación. Ujú.
oye, Isaac, hazme un favor. Pon la parte de obituarios, porque les quiero platicar algo. Mira, toda la comunidad leemos este diario todos los días, así como dice Isaac, porque aquí viene, aparte, te dicen quiénes son las gentes de la comunidad que murieron. Te dicen cuándo murieron, qué pasó. Entonces, cuando Isaac te dice que el mercado está muy dirigido y que sí tiene un mercado cautivo, es cierto. Yo veo diario judío 4 o 5 veces al día desde que está el problema con Israel. Y te puedo asegurar que los demás también lo estamos viendo 1000 veces. Esto es una parte. Enséñanos los videos que tienes, porfa. A ver, ponle para... Súbelo ahí. Bájalo tantito, quiero ver quién es. Raquel, yo sé quién es Raquel Uber, conozco muy bien a su hija. Se murió la mamá de Raquel. Aquí esto, yo la conozco muy bien a Raquel, era mi vecina. Esto lo vemos diario, todos lo vemos, Leo y Luis y Gus, todos los días vemos esto. Entonces esto nos pone al corriente. Y luego pon por favor la parte de los videos. Quiero enseñarles algo. Donde tienes los videos. Tienes una parte donde tienes videos. Tienes un montón de videos. Esos videos salen en YouTube, ¿verdad, Isaac? Ahí, ahí también, ahí también podemos poner un banner o podemos poner algo o no. Pon alguno, el que quieras. Pon el de los nazis en México que vi. Súbelo. Ok, vete a alguno.
Si la realidad es que todos, y yo no me imagino forma, pero la primera es, tengo que estar en internet, porque yo ya tengo mis tiendas físicas, que ya supimos que tuvieron que cerrar, ya tengo mi negocio, puse una tienda outlet por ahí. ¿Para qué quiero internet? Es mucho rollo, a lo mejor ya tengo mis tiendas, más fácil.
Ya, mira, al final del día, yo creo que todo el mundo ya estamos cansados.
Ni idea.
$120,000.
No,
No, pues,
100,000, o sea, no tantas, la verdad.
Quita la pantalla ya,
escuchar
Isaac, si quieres.
la transformación digital y tienes que estar en línea y si no estás en línea vas a morir.
Gus, ¿tienes algún comentario?
Pues digo, está muy aparejado a lo que comentó Eud de las mediciones, pero pues Isaac tiene razón, ¿no? En esta plataforma es complicado. Sí sé que es un target específico y sí sé que podría ser atractivo para nosotros, pero pues yo no soy el experto en esto, ¿no? Yo soy el experto técnico y no podría opinar más sobre mercadotecnia.
Mira, a mí
Bueno, lo último que compré fue una bocina. Sí, fue una bocina en Amazon y nada más, ¿no? He puesto mis datos en cerca de, no sé, como 2 páginas, ¿no? 70 plataformas. Como 70. Como 6, 7 páginas al día. Pero generalmente son las mismas. Sí. Correcto. Sí, exactamente, las brinco. Sí, las podría, sí, podría brincarlas, seguramente.
Mira, aquí lo que me gusta es que, como les decía, vamos a llegar a la comunidad judía, a targets muy importantes. Tienes razón, Isaac, lo que dijo al principio de la plática. Los hijos de los paisanos de la comunidad sefaradí, créanme, que empiezan a trabajar algunos desde los 12 y 13 años. Y los ya no, ya estudian. Y los pone el papá a trabajar, les enseña el negocio. Entonces, lo que dice Isaac es cierto, un chavo de 16 años que trabaja con el papá en una fábrica es amigo del hijo de otro señor que tiene otra fábrica. ¿Se acuerdan cuando les dije que la comunidad judía es como un BNI privado? Es justo esto. Tú entras con una persona y esa persona te va a recomendar con otro y así nos vamos a ir con el hilito, ¿no? Aquí Diario Judío llega a ese tipo de mercado, ¿no? No es tanto como lo que tenemos en Facebook, o a lo mejor no vamos a tener los analíticos que tenemos con EUD, pero sí tenemos un target muy definido, ¿no? Y ahí habría que nosotros evaluarlo. Entonces, también. Aquí sí cabe decir que una buena recomendación es una sarta de recomendaciones, pero una mala nos puede hacer daño.
Sí.
Aquí sí, y bueno, pero aquí es muy, como está muy concentrado, está muy cerrado el círculo, aquí todos se conocen. A lo mejor tú me dices, oye, ¿conoces al señor Zuraski? Pues yo no lo conozco, pero Isaac sí, y le pregunto y en 2 segundos ya sabemos quiénes somos. Hay una relación entre todos muy, muy cercana, ¿no? Entonces aquí lo bueno es eso, ¿no? Que estaríamos entrando a una comunidad donde vamos a tener una promoción muy fuerte. Podemos probar.
Sí.
¿Qué opinas, Luis?
Yo sí quisiera probar, pero tendríamos que establecer primero un muy buen video, un muy buen contenido para demostrar. El otro día Leo decía algo atinado. Tenemos que enseñarles la plataforma, porque entonces cuando ellos puedan ver la cerca, ¿cómo pueden crear esas cercas? Van a decir, y entonces yo creo que el secreto va a ser primero un buen contenido, y a las personas que nos arroje Isaac tenemos que atenderlos, pero de ya inmediato. No vamos a tener los datos. Yo también era mi opinión lo que decía Eud, ya no las contestó Isaac, pero yo sí me la aventaría a probarlo.
Sí. Yo creo que podemos hacer alguna campaña especial y Eud con Arum, de lo que vamos a hacer ahorita de redes sociales, podemos aprovechar y simplemente ponerlo con Isaac y ver cómo funciona, ¿no? Mira, Isaac, una de las cosas que queremos es, cuando nosotros hacemos la promoción, no vendemos radios. Mostramos el problema y mostramos la solución. Ese es nuestro. ¿Eso es correcto, Eud y Luis?
Sí. Sí, correcto, Charlie.
Es correcto.
Exacto.
Sí. Sí, exacto. De hecho, Isaac, te platico un poquito y aquí podemos unir los dos mundos, ¿no? La parte de la promoción en los sitios web de Isaac, Diario Judío y más. Nosotros podemos definir un landing page, es decir, no van a llegar al home, no van a llegar a estas secciones, una landing page específicamente para ese banner o ese producto, esa solución que tú nos mandes hacia allá, y nosotros vamos a saber que viene de Diario Judío o de algún otro sitio. Podemos parametrizar la URL y saber con datos de dónde viene, ¿no? Y una vez que sepamos de dónde viene, también podemos saber si llegó y la persona llenó el formulario de cotización, y luego ya con Leo podríamos saber si esa persona adquirió la solución, pagó. Entonces, ese proceso que les estoy diciendo, nosotros podemos medir la efectividad de la promoción que estamos haciendo en Diario Judío, ¿no? Los banners, todo eso. Si no nos están comprando, no están pagando por la solución que estamos ofertando y se quedan alguno de los saltos, tenemos que ir modificando ese salto nada más, ¿no? Entonces, Isaac, tienes razón, cuando llegas al home ahorita ves los radios, son los banners, pero estamos modificando toda la estrategia para que nosotros estamos vendiendo soluciones, estamos solucionando un problema, atacando un problema que se llama seguridad y demás. O sea, no vendemos radios, pero realmente Radicom empezó así, con un producto, y eso que estás viendo es un sitio web, pero vamos a cambiar los sliders, todo lo que tú ves del slide, lo vamos a cambiar con otras imágenes, pero realmente no van a llegar al home. O sea, la idea es que sean landing page específicos.
Leo.
Sí, sí. No, a mí creo que estamos llegando a un buen entendimiento. Ya nos dijo Eud cómo cómo podríamos utilizar lo mejor posible los clics que nos arroje Diario Judío. Y sí, para mí la página, la web que tenemos, en realidad es para la gente que quiere saber, ya es gente que nos contactó o gente que está buscando los radios directamente. Entonces, por eso es así. Pero la comunicación que necesitamos tener para atraer los leads es sobre las necesidades, ¿no? Entonces, creo que estamos todos en la misma línea, ¿no? Y igual que Luis, yo sí le daría el voto de confianza a Diario Judío, pero sí cuando ahorita tengamos ya un buen video, un buen contenido pues para hacerlo mucho más eficiente, ¿no?
De acuerdo, Leo.
Bien. Pues Isaac, entonces, ¿por qué no hacemos algo? Mándanos una propuesta, los precios, sepamos de cómo están, para que yo lo comparta con todos. Y Eud, lo que podríamos hacer de lo que vas a hacer de Facebook, algo de eso podemos poner aquí y podemos empezar con eso, ¿no?
Sí, nada más que aquí justo son banners específicos, o sea, es diferente, la estrategia es diferente. El diseño, lo gráfico tiene que ser diferente.
Pero voy a que tienes la idea de lo que vamos a hacer, es a lo que yo iba.
Sí, claro, sí, sigue siendo un landing page, de hecho, específico para la pauta que se va a hacer en Diario Judío o los demás sitios. Y en Facebook son igual landing page diferentes, porque nosotros tenemos que saber de dónde vienen, o sea, de todos los medios en los que estemos pautados. Yo necesito decirte a ti, Charlie, venimos de Diario Judío, venimos de Facebook, venimos de Google y, bueno, los saltos son estos. Entonces, ¿dónde estamos llegando más y estamos vendiendo más? Estamos cerrando ya la venta, es de tal pauta, de tal lugar. O sea, yo necesito sí darte resultados en estadísticas, si no me chupo el dedo al aire, o sea, no puedo hacer eso.
Por eso quise que tú participaras en esta junta con Isaac, porque van de la manita, ¿no? Ahorita que Isaac pone la propuesta, tomamos la decisión y nos ponemos a trabajar si decidimos que adelante. Y bueno, yo creo que podemos tener un resultado muy bueno. A mí me emociona porque conozco a la comunidad y llevo hablándoles mucho y les he estado compartiendo algunos videos y algunos artículos que salen en Diario Judío. Y tú tienes algo que ver en Enlace Judío también, ¿no, Isaac? Nada. ¿Es otro? ¿No está tu hermano ahí? En Diario, ok. Bueno, pues estamos nosotros contigo al 1000. Ya sabes que te quiero. La verdad es que yo pienso que nos va a ir bien. Hay que hacer algo bonito. Podemos probar, Eud, y vamos a tener buenos resultados. A mí no me preocupa tanto el que no tengamos la data que tú nos vas a dar, porque a lo mejor el impacto lo vamos a ver de inmediato. Ayer puse en la noche, a las 10 de la noche, puse 2 parrillas de las que teníamos antes. El resultado fue que recibí hasta hoy 25 gentes interesadas en esto. Ya les contesté a los 25 de los en Shuk. Platícanos de Shuk también, por favor. Sí, yo sé. Platícanos de Shuk, por favor, porque los...
Sí.
Aceptas.
Sí, claro. Sí, estoy completamente de acuerdo, Isaac. Y como lo dice Charlie, hay que tener diferentes pues medios de dónde va a llegar pues el prospecto a Radicom. Entonces, sí, Charlie, me parece interesante y creo que podemos hacer un buen equipo con Isaac.
Yo creo que sí.
Sí, sí, sí. Luis ahí tenía ese tipo de ideas de generar contenido, entrevistas de ese tipo. Está interesante.
Además hay otra cosa. A lo mejor nadie conoce Radicom, pero ven mi nombre y ven Gemora y saben, me conocen. Entonces hay un vínculo. O ven el de Marión, o ven el de David, que son paisanos, Entonces se genera un vínculo y de inmediato se genera la confianza. Entonces dicen, a ver, mándame, de los 25 que recibí, 4 mandaron el mail y pidieron ya información, 4. Los otros 21 les mandé yo un mensajito, ¿no? Entonces, pues vamos a ver qué resultados hay de estos 4, ¿no? No espero gran cosa, pero me sentí a gusto que me contestaron. Pues vamos a trabajar, Eud, yo te mando los datos de Isaac. Isaac, te mando los datos de todos para que los tengas y mándanos una propuesta y yo pienso que si hay alguna duda, pues te contactaremos nuevamente antes de saber qué hacer y trabajaremos con la mano con Isaac. ¿Cómo ves, Eud?
Muy bien. No, muy bien. Excelente, Charlie.
Ok. Pues bueno. Gus, ¿algún comentario al final?
No, ninguno, Charlie. Ninguno. Sí me parece buena idea empezar a prospectar y ver cuál es la opción que mejor se acomoda a nosotros. Y bueno, ahí con la landing page que comenta Eud, pues se pueden tener las mediciones que se quieren para ver los orígenes y finalmente el destino de esas interacciones.
Exacto.
Oye, Eud, ¿te acuerdas de la tarjeta digital que vas a hacer? ¿No podrías también poner algo así aquí en Diario Judío?
Sí, de hecho, podemos jugar con lo que se llama código QR. Entiendo que son clics, ¿no? En Diario Judío son enlaces, pero también si la gente puede escanear, los podemos llevar a las tarjetas digitales de un colaborador, no sé, de Leo, de Marión, de quien se decida, o también lo podemos llevar a otro lado. Es decir, tenemos el clic que te va a llevar a una página, pero cuando escanean te lleva a otra página. O sea, aprovechamos de un solo banner 2 salidas. Llegan a dos lugares diferentes.
Ok.
Sí. Exacto. Sí, exacto. Sí, mira, de hecho, Isaac, lo que vamos a hacer con Radicom, por ejemplo, Charlie tiene ahorita su fondo de Zoom, está usando el color verde y lo voy a regañar frente a ti porque ya no está usando la última versión.
No,
Esta es la anterior.
no sé qué demonios hago.
Pero bueno, vamos por una tercera versión, Isaac, y vamos a meter un código QR ahí donde está Charlie, y tú vas a poder escanearlo y te va a llevar a su tarjeta digital, donde le vas a poder dejar un mensaje y vas a poder darle clics a los diferentes redes sociales, medios que tenemos en Radicom. Hasta vas a poder descargar un catálogo. O sea, estamos aprovechando el tema digital para generar pues este enlace, una comunidad que pensamos generar, ¿no? De todos lados.
Pues muy bien, mi querido Isaac. Pues adelante, mándanos la propuesta, porfa, y yo te comparto los teléfonos de todos y ya vamos a ponernos a trabajar en esto. Perfecto. Pues muy bien, Isaac. Te agradezco mucho. ¿Cómo está Diana, tu hermana? No me digas. Oye, felicidades. ¿Está bien, Dianita? Bueno, me da gusto. Me da gusto. Qué bueno, Isaac. Bueno, pues te mando un abrazo. Gracias por la junta y estamos en contacto.
Un abrazo, Isaac.
¿Perdón? Sí, le voy a hablar a Moy Resnick, ¿ok? Órale, gracias, Isaac.
Gracias, Isaac. Un gusto.
Bye.
Gracias.
Gracias, Luis, Leo. Gracias.
Estamos ahí.
Bueno, ya nos quedamos. Isaac, ya se salió Gustavo.
Sí, creo que tenía prisa.
Sí, creo que tenía. Luis, yo te tengo que echar un telefonazo para ponerme de acuerdo contigo, y quitarme ese mal, ese tache que tengo. Pero la verdad, que te diga Leo, las veces que salgo contigo y llego a mi casa, ¿verdad que llego hecho pedazos?
Sí.
Te lo juro, hace cuenta que corrí un maratón. Por cierto, te vi haciendo ejercicio en una foto ayer, Luis, o antier, ¿no? De espaldas, estabas con las manos así. Dije yo, puta, qué bueno, yo no puedo ni pararme, cabrón, para que me entiendas. Pero
luego me gustaría también, Charlie, date el tiempo, platicarte el papel de Rafa. Estamos desperdiciando.
Isaac, gracias, ¿eh? Te mando un abrazo. Te hablo luego.
Que estés bien.
Gracias, Isaquito. Bye.